Let's continue working with our survey or questionnaire application. At the end of the last episode, we finally got some data in our database, but now let's shift our focus a little bit and start working on the view necessary to see this new questionnaire. The first thing I have is a small bug here. I redirected back to questionnaire, but it should have been questionnaires with an S. So let's go ahead and make that change, and I'll make that change right here. And so now we are back to this. All right, so let's add a new question. That way we get the entire flow. What should we do next? For example, we'll say choice 1. Let me copy this, do the same thing. And then we'll do 3. And finally, we'll do 4. We'll add a question. And sure enough, we end up back here. However, we don't see our questions. So this right here is hitting the questionnaires controller. Let me close this up. Let's go to the questionnaires controller. And that pertains to my show view. The first thing I want to show you here, though, is the fact that we are using route model binding, but now we are fetching a distant relationship. So we don't have any relations. The thing about it, though, is that if we don't lazy load our relationship, then we're going to create an n+1 problem for ourselves whenever we start to display the questions inside the questionnaire. Because each questionnaire is going to have questions, and each question will have 4 answers. That's a ton of different things that it has to do. We can fix that, though, by doing something called lazy loading. So during lazy loading, we can take our questionnaire and say, hey, let's go ahead and load a relationship. Now, you can use nested relationships in here. So yes, I want to load my questions, and that is referencing my questionnaires relationship, this one right here. The reason why I can use questions right here during the lazy loading process is because I have questions in here. Now, if questions itself, meaning this model, has an additional relationship, then I could use nested relationships on that. So what I want to grab is answers. So to do that, I could do questions dot answers. So with that, now we are lazy loading the questions and answers. And to show you what that looks like, let me dial up questionnaire one more time. We'll go back here. I'll hit refresh. And now I have a relations section here in my model. When I open that up, I've got questions, and then I've got 2 questions right now, and we see that right there. But then each question itself has a relation right here, which has my answers, and we've got 4 of those. Let me show you the difference if we don't load the answers. I'll go ahead and delete the answers part of it. We'll hit refresh. We do get our questions one more time, like so. But now there is no relations with the answers. So we lazy loaded the questions, but we didn't lazy load the answers. So we still end up with an n+1 problem. To fix both at the same time, we'll go ahead and eager load the questions and the answers. Okay, so now our questionnaire.show has the appropriate data that it's going to need. Let's go in there now, and let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to do this. All I'm thinking about is we could just add cards for each one of the questions available. I will go ahead and copy my card, and now let's add a new for each section. We'll say for each questionnaire, and then I could use that relationship, questions. So that is going to return a collection to me, and we'll call that question. I'll go ahead and paste my card in right there, and then end for each. Okay, for the card title, let's use the questions question. We'll say question, arrow question. There we go. And then for my answers, I will need a list. I'll cut that out. Let me go back into Bootstrap website. Let me do a quick search here for list group. And there it is. Just a simple list. That's all I need. I'll go ahead and copy that. Let's bring that in here. I only need a single list item. And what I'm going to do here is a nested for each. That way I can get each of the answers inside this particular question. So we'll say inside our question, I want the answers as answer. I'll paste that in, and then let's end the for each. And now inside of here, I can simply output out answer, answer. Like that. Does that make sense? Let's go through it. We've got a big for each loop, which is basically grabbing each of the questions inside this questionnaire, which remember, we lazy loaded, and that's why we could do this the correct way. We are renaming that to a question variable. So we're going to have a card for each of my questions. As the card header, we are using the actual question. Then inside of a list group, we are actually grabbing each of the answers and saving them to answer. And then we're just using that as one of the items. So we're going to have 4 of these items per question. Now, it just occurred to me right now that I accidentally deleted the card body. This right here, the card needs that. Let me go ahead and add that back in. So card body, we'll just wrap that like so. Okay, let me fix my indentation. There we go. Okay, so we've got the card header, we've got the card body. That's more Bootstrap stuff. I just accidentally deleted that. Okay, let's take a look in the browser. Let's see what we have. I'll hit refresh, and sure enough, we've got our first question here with the 4 answers, and we've got the second question here with my 4 answers. Only thing missing here is obviously we need a little bit of margin. Let's do margin top of 4. Let's try 4. Yeah, 4 looks good. So now, when we add a new question, we'll say yet another one. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We'll add that question, and now that is down here. Yet another one, 1, 2, 3, and all of my answers. So that's great, because now we can see all of the questions, which is awesome. But next, we need the ability for somebody to actually take this questionnaire. So let's start working on that. Let's add a button right here. And ultimately, what I would want is to have a public sharing address that someone could potentially give to somebody else, and they don't need to have an account with our application or anything like that. So we're going to want that to be in a totally separate view. Remember, the view that we are currently on is protected by authentication. You do have to be logged in. You actually have to own this questionnaire to even see this. So just keep that in mind. Let's add that button now. Simple enough to do. Let's go ahead and make another anchor tag. And we'll talk about where it's going to go in just a second. But let's go ahead and change this to take survey. I've decided that in our application, a questionnaire is going to be the set of questions, and then the responses from somebody that is going to be grouped into a survey, and then each of the individual responses for each answer will be a survey response. But I will explain every step of the way. Don't worry about that just now. Let's talk about the address though. I think it makes sense for us to start with /surveys. Let's do that now. And after that, what we could do is maybe use our questionnaire ID. Okay, we'll put that in there. But then I really want something else. Now, one technique that I can teach you right here is a lot of times you'll see an address that has the slugified version of the title of that page or of that blog post or whatever that is. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Let's add another dash. And after that, let's slugify the title. So what would that look like? Well, let's start with the title, and then we can use str. Str is a set of string tools that come with Laravel that help us do things like slugs. So we'll say str, colon, and then we'll use the slug method on that. And then we'll go ahead and close the parentheses back here. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a go. And what I want to show you is what it actually outputs out. I'll do an inspect on this and check that out. So it's going to be /surveys /1 and then -cool -title. Our title is cool title. So notice how nice of a slug it made for us automatically. That's pretty cool, right? In future lessons, we'll touch up on more on slug, but just know that it's just a set of tools available to you. And there's actually a ton of very cool things in there. All right, but now when we click on this, of course, we don't have a route. How do we handle these routes? Obviously, we're going to have a little bit of a different route here. So let's explore how that would happen. Let me go ahead and open a new route here. We'll say route get. So we know it's going to be /surveys, then /what? Well, it's going to be /my questionnaire. So let's start with that. Questionnaire. And then there's going to be a dash followed by what I will call a slug. Okay. Now, this is a slightly different format than what we've been using up here, right? Because we have this idea that there are two pieces of data within the same string. Now, the only thing that is going to separate these two pieces of data is this dash right here. And if you take a look at the address up here, we're going to grab whatever is in the front right after survey / up until the very first dash. And then we're going to grab the rest of that string. The slug itself, we're truthfully not that interested in it. We're going to ignore it altogether, but I'll show you how to grab it anyway. Now, this needs to hit a new controller, which is going to be the survey controller. And for method on this, let's use the show, because this will basically show that. Now, technically, you could use the create or the show. It's entirely up to you. The reason why I'm not using create like I did up here is because I don't want to have that /create. I just want this pure string. I feel like the show is probably okay for this. You could always use the create method here and not do the /. Up to you. Just know that that's what I'm doing. I am purposely not following RESTful controllers 100%, but I sort of am at the same time. Okay, so now we have a route, but we don't have that survey controller. Easy enough. Let's add that. PHP Artisan make controller survey controller. Okay, now of course it's going to say, well, you don't have a show view. Okay, easy enough. Let's go ahead and open up the survey controller. And let's add the very first method here, show. Okay, now let me go back to my web routes. I still have questionnaire, so I can still use route model binding for this. Let's go ahead and do that now. We'll say app questionnaire. I'll go ahead and import that class at the top. That way it's nice and clean, like so. We'll clean up any unused imports. And now, I told you I was going to show you how to use the slug, how to get this slug right here. Well, as it turns out, as a second argument here, we can just accept a slug. As easy as that. As a matter of fact, I can die and dump slug right here. And now we can get that second piece of data. Whatever we type back here, that is just going to be passed through to us right here. But like I said, I'm not really interested in that. That is mostly going to be just so that we have a nice address. We don't actually need it. So we're not going to use it at all. It's just going to go unused. But I do have my questionnaire, which is what I'm interested in. And there it is. So now, of course, we're not going to die and dump. We're going to return a view. Let's return a new view. And this is going to be under survey.show. And we need to pass through my questionnaire. So let's compact the questionnaire, as we've always done. And now, of course, it's going to say, well, I don't have that view. Let's go ahead and create that view now. Now, the best thing that I could do here is just reuse one of my other views. This one right here. I'll go ahead and open it up and let's save as. It's not going to be create anymore. It's going to be called show now, as that's what I'm using. And this is going to go into survey. Okay. All right, so we've copied that. Obviously, the action for our form is going to be something else. We'll talk about that in just a second, but let's start modifying this view to work for what we need. Ultimately, I want this to be a nice form that someone can use to submit their version of the survey. So let's start with a nice H1 tag up here for the title. So we'll output out questionnaire title. And right after my title, let's start a new form. I'll tell you what, we'll do it 100% from scratch. Like I said, we'll go somewhere. I'm not worried about that right now. Let's go ahead and leave that blank and let's go to method. It's going to be a post like so. And inside of here, the questionnaire has questions. Now, we didn't really load them in my controller, so let's go ahead and do that now as well. Let's say questionnaire. Go ahead and lazy load questions and my answers. I need both of those. So now when we go to take survey, here we go. That's what we have so far. We just have our cool title over the top. Let me close this up so that we clean it up a little bit. All right, so we are back in our form. Inside of this form, we're going to need the CSRF token. We can never forget that. So let's add that up front. And then after that, we need to iterate through each of the questions. Now, we already know how to do that. So we'll do for each questionnaire questions as question. And we'll end for each. So now inside of here, we'll have each of the questions. So what we could do here is go ahead and have a card for each of the questions at this point. Let me go fetch one of those cards from my show view. And here it is. Let me go ahead and grab this right here. And let's come back to my survey and I'll paste that in. So we'll have a card. At the top, we'll add the question. Now, one thing that would be nice is if I displayed maybe like a number, like this is question number 1, this is question number 2. How can we do that? Well, one thing we haven't talked about is for each in PHP in general has 2 versions. This short version that we're using, but there's also a version where you can actually grab the key and do a pair like that. So now we would have a key, but arrays are 0-based index. So this would technically start with question 0, which is a little weird. Let's add a strong tag. So what we could do is just add 1 to it. So we'll have our key. Like I said, it will start at 0. See, so it would look like that, 0, 1, 2. That's a little weird. For humans, we start at 1, right? So we'll say +1. And now we have 1. How cool is that? Now, one thing here is we don't notice the bold. We don't notice the strong. But that's because Laravel doesn't actually import the strong version of the font. If we take a look at the app.blade, right here, right where we are bringing in our font, this Nunito. There's another version of it. Let me do a quick side note here for this, because I think it's important that you understand how the Google fonts work. They're very, very useful. So we go into Google Fonts. Initially, this will import only one weight. So if you say select font and you take a look at customize, you see that regular is the only thing that gets imported. However, if we clicked on bold and we go back to the embed, notice that now we have this right here. And this is really what we are looking for. Let me go back to PHP Storm. Right after this, we can add, whoops, I added that twice. We'll get rid of that. You can add whatever weights you need. So we want to import the 400 weight and the 700 weights. So now, if we take a look at our application, sure enough, the 1, the 2, you see that it is bolded. So that's just a quick little tip with using Google Fonts, is that you can customize which weights you want to bring in. And so that's how we get that to work. Awesome. So that's good so far. Let's keep working through this. Let me close that off. All right, back to where we were. So we've got our question up here. Next, I do need basically a list group, but of radio buttons, because ultimately each of these answers is going to be a radio button. So inside of my LI, instead of just displaying out the answer, we need to add a new input. And it's going to be an input of type radio. For name, as you know, we're going to have something special. So for now, let's leave it blank. I'm not going to put anything in there. And now in terms of ID, each one needs to have a specific ID. So what we can use is maybe just the answer ID. So we can say answer, and then we can output out with PHP the answer ID. This is just going to give us a unique ID. And that's really what I'm after. I want every single of these input radio buttons to have a unique ID. This is one easy way that we can make that happen. And now let's go ahead and output out my actual answer right underneath. All right, let's check out progress. Okay, so that's looking good. It's a little bit on top of each other. We can fix that though. Let's add a class here, a class of margin left of 2. Whoops, I added it in the wrong place. Margin right of 2. There we go. All right, so now we have a little bit of space. Here's one thing that I hate, and it's I can only click on the actual radio button instead of being able to click on the whole word. This drives me insane whenever I see websites that just don't have a nice and big target. It's really easy to fix, to be honest with you. The only thing we need to do is wrap the whole thing in a label. Right outside of my LI, I'm going to cut it out altogether, and let's just add a label that we can wrap it all the way around. Now the label, we already have a unique ID. Remember, the unique ID is answer and then the ID of the answer. We can say answer ID. Okay, now I'll paste that back in. Now with the simple fix, whoops, it doesn't work. Did I miss something? Oh yeah, answers, no, it's answer to match answer right here. Okay, all right, with this simple click now, I can actually click anywhere in this box. Doesn't matter where it is, and it will still get selected. Of course, I could still hit my radio button. How cool is that? This is one of those like public important information that you need to know when you're developing things. It's important to test things out. Most users are not going to click on this. Most users are probably going to click on the word. So just know that just wrapping it with a label will fix that all together. Now, in order for this label to work though, you saw that. You need the 4, which means you need a unique ID for every single input field. And sometimes it's easier than you think to be able to just have a unique ID. All you need to do is find some sort of unique ID in some column or something like that to make that work. All right, let's keep going with this. Let's talk about the name. We've been talking about how to get these nested arrays to basically just do all of the work for us, and this episode is going to be no different. We're going to take it to the next level though. So let's go ahead and start out with what I think should be the final name. Like I said, this is going to be called the responses for surveys. So let's start with responses, and then to responses, I do need to have a key because I need to group them together. Let's use the key of the question. Okay. So inside of here, I'll go ahead and output out the key. So this is going to be responses 0, for example, on the first one, and then 1 on the second one, and so on and so forth. And then inside of here, I can just have my answer ID, because the value of this needs to be equal to my answer ID. So let's add value now. Let's say value of each one of these is going to be my answer ID. So again, we are using the answer ID as a value. In order for us to see this though and start to see how it's working out, we do need to create the action for our form. Now, I think that it would make the most sense if we continue to use the same exact URL that we've been using already. So that would look something like surveys / and then the ID of the questionnaire. So let's recreate that. So questionnaire ID a dash and then a slug. So I basically need to have the same exact thing that I had in the other place. So we'll say str slug and then we'll have my questionnaire title. All right, does that make sense? Again, I am posting to the same place and it's the same exact address. The only difference here is that it's going to be a post request. So now I can go back here and I can simply change this over to a post request. And then let's go ahead and hit the store method. It doesn't exist yet, and I do want to create one now. So let's create a store method inside my survey controller. And for now, let's dump all of my data. So we'll say request all. That way we get everything all together. And then if I go click on here, this is actually a different form. Hang on. Let's fix that real quick. Down here, I've got a totally different form. I'll go ahead and disable all of this. Let me go ahead and comment that out because I actually don't need it. So at the end of my form here, let me create a quick button that we can use. This will be a button. Let's give it some classes. Let's do class BTN and BTN dark. And this is going to be of type submit. And let's go ahead and say complete survey. All right, there we go. Let's give this another go. And there we go. All right, I'll click on a couple of these answers and I'll hit complete survey. So there we go. In terms of our data, we have a responses key. And then inside of that, I've got an array that has my answer ID. And it matches exactly what I need. Okay, so we're making good progress on this. However, I do need the answer, but it's the answer to what question? How could I possibly include the question ID as well? And at first glance, it may not be super obvious, but we can add a hidden field. Why not? Right inside of this li tag. And that would look something like this. Let's add an input. Going to be of type hidden. In terms of name, well, let's start with this name right here. We'll paste that in. But instead of answer ID, this is going to be my question ID. I need to know what this answer actually belongs to. So we'll use the question ID. And then for value, we know what that is because that is just my question ID. So let's output out question ID. Okay, let's go back here. I'll hit refresh. I'll click on a couple of these. Complete survey. Now we've got 3 things and check that out. I've got the question ID. I've got the answer ID. So I basically have everything that I need to be able to create that record. I've got the question and I've got the answer ID. And it's all nice and nested inside that I can basically send it right on through. So next, let's work on a little bit of validation. I think it's important on all these surveys. If someone completes the survey, it shouldn't go on. It should say, you know what? You need to have an answer for every single one of these fields. Let's go back into the survey controller. Let's get validation in place. We'll say data equals request validate. And then in here, we're going to have obviously some sort of nested validation. We know that we've got a set of fields that are all nested under the responses. And then inside of that, we're going to have any number of things. The first thing is we're going to have an answer ID, and that is going to be required. Next, I'm going to have something very similar, but I do know that it's not answer ID. It's going to be question ID. And now we're going to have some validation. However, whenever I click on this, yeah, it comes back, but I don't have a way of displaying it. I need a way of displaying that in my show view. So let's add that right down here. Where the card body starts, I can add that right here. We'll say error. And then let's do end error. And my error, how am I going to grab it? Well, I'm going to grab it using the key. Because if you remember, right down here, we're using the key as the answer ID. So it's going to take something very similar to this. It's going to be something like responses. Then we're going to have dot. Then I'll output out the key. Let's get rid of all of this. And then I'll have another string here, which will start with answer ID. And it'll end in just a quote. So it'll basically translate to responses dot 0, for example, dot answer ID. So if I do have one of those, let's go ahead and output out some sort of error message. We'll say small. Let's give this a class of text danger. And we'll just output out the message. Nothing new here. We've been doing this all along. All right, so now I won't fill anything out. I'll hit complete survey, and now we've got nice validation for each one of these fields. Now, if I click on one of them and I complete survey, sure enough, it goes away, but now it's not selected. Obviously, we need to make that happen. We cannot do that to our users. We need to use that old trick again. So let's go into my input field. Let's add a new line, and let's go ahead and output out selected or not selected based upon what comes back from old. So like I said, we'll use old. We'll do this as a single inline if statement. So we'll say if old, and then I can use the exact same responses key that I used up here. So if old of that, so basically using the same exact key, nothing new there. If that is equal to my answer ID, then that means that this is the checked input field. So let's output out checked. And if it's not, then don't output out anything. All right, let's give this a go. I'll click on this first answer. I'll click complete survey. And sure enough, notice that on refresh, that is still selected. I can select another one. I'll select choice 2. And now it doesn't pass validation, but my first 2 answers are already there. The only one that's not there, of course, is answer 3, which if I do click, then we do go through into our survey. All right, so we've got validation. The last thing is very easy. Last thing we need to do is actually just go ahead and save this to the database. It's going to take 2 tables. It's going to take the survey table, and it's going to take the survey response table. So let's go ahead and create those at the same time. PHP Artisan make model survey with a migration and survey response. And we will need a migration for that as well. Let me open up my survey model. And the first thing I'll do is I'll turn guarded off. So guarded equals an empty array. And then I'll do the same exact thing for survey response. Guarded equals empty array. Now my survey, this survey belongs to a questionnaire. So let's add that now. Public function, questionnaire, return, this belongs to a questionnaire. Class, there we go. So of course, a questionnaire will have many surveys. So let's add that relationship here. Say public function, it will be surveys, return, this has many, survey. Okay, so now my survey response, this is going to belong to a survey. Let's add a public function here for survey, return, this belongs to a survey, like so. And in the inverse of that, a survey will have many survey responses. Let's just call them responses. Public function responses, return, this has many survey responses, class, like so. And then that's it. We basically have all of the different things that can happen. So a survey, which is what stands in between a questionnaire and an actual response to an answer, it belongs to a questionnaire and it has many responses. A response, it just simply belongs to a survey. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go into my controller and figure out how to save this. Let's go into the survey controller. And I've got the data here. So very similar to what we did before, we need to generate that survey first. So we'll say survey. We need to go ahead and grab the questionnaire, which we don't have yet, but again, we can use route model binding. Let me copy this in. We'll put that in the store method like so. So now we have a questionnaire, and then let's use that new relationship that we just created for surveys. Then we'll go ahead and create a new one. Now, in terms of what I'm going to send to this, I really basically only need maybe a name and an email, but I don't have any data to send to it. Let's fix that right now. Let me add 2 more fields to my form so that at the end, figured down here, we'll say give us your name and give us your email address, for example. Just 2 fields that I can use to identify the customer. Remember that at the end of the day, whoever's taking the survey is not logged in. This is going to be a public-facing part to our application. So let's add another card to that show method. And I actually have some data here. Let's bring this data back like so. All right, so I've got a card. Let's say your information, like so. This doesn't need a form. Let me get rid of this form. It's going to be part of the form that I already have. So we could do that, and let's re-indent this. I also will not need a button, so let's get rid of all that together. All right, so we've got a title here and a purpose. This needs to be a name, and it needs to be an email. So let's start with title. We'll change this over to name, and then let's change this to your name. And then for placeholder, enter your name. And then for information, let's say, hello, what's your name? Okay, then let's change purpose over to email. And then we'll say your email here, and then enter your email. Maybe just enter email instead. There we go. And then for text, let's just say your email, please. Like so. Okay. And then I'll have a message here. Now I can change the type here from text to just email. And let's see what that looks like. There we go. Now this complete survey, it can move. Let's go ahead and move that button. I'll cut it out of there. Let's put it down here. I think it makes more sense. Wrap it in a div though. And then let's go ahead and see what we have. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now this is on top of each other. So we need to give a little bit of room to this card. Let's say margin top of 4. There we go. All right, so now we've got this at the end. Now, in terms of the names of these two things, I do want to group them together the way that I have been doing for everything else. So let's change the name. Right now, the name needs to be grouped in some sort of survey key. So we'll say survey, and I'm changing both of them at the same time. And then we'll use array notation again, and that way we now have a nice formatted string. Let me show you what that looks like. I'll actually just output out this again. Let me move this to the top, like so. All right, let me give this a go. I'll type something in here, and when I try to complete it, it doesn't work. And that is because my form element ends here. So I need to cut this one out. Yeah, we need to include the whole thing. So let me move this one, and then I'll end my form there instead. Looks like I'm missing one more div, and there we go. Okay, so all I did was just extend my form so that it's all the way. All right, let's give this another go. This is going to complain because it's not an email. That's okay. All right, so now we've got this survey subkey, and then inside of that, we've got a name and an email. So this survey subkey is what I want to use for my controller. So in my controller, the data that I can pass through here is data survey, like so. So now, presumably, I will have a survey at that point. I can use that new responses relationship that I created on the survey to create many of those survey answers. Let's do that now. Survey, responses, create, but remember I need to do create many because I have an array. Inside of here, we'll simply pass through those responses. Responses, remember those belong to this right here. This responses is what I'm passing through. In this case, it doesn't have any of the answer IDs, but that's because it didn't pass validation. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll turn on validation again as soon as I get rid of this line. So we'll have that in place. And for now, just to call it for now, we'll just say return thank you. We can return a nice view at this point, thanking the user for filling out our survey. We're not worried about that right now. I just want to wrap this up and see it working. The last little bit though is I do want to make those two new fields that I added required. As we did before, let's add survey.name. That will be required. And survey.email will also be required, but let's make sure that it's an email. That's another little class that we can add there using pipe. So it's going to be required and it needs to be of type email. So at this point, we've got all the logic, but we are missing a big piece, and that is my actual migrations. I created them, but I haven't filled them out, and I haven't even migrated my database. Let's take care of those very quickly. Let's go into the create surveys table. And in here, we know we're going to have a name and an email, right? I need to store that name and email of information inside my survey. So we'll add strings for that, for name, as well as my email. And then this needs to be associated to a questionnaire ID. So we'll say table, unsigned big integer for questionnaire underscore ID. Awesome. Let's jump into the create surveys responses, and I will have another one of those unsigned big integers, and this is going to be for question ID as well as answer ID. Remember, that's what I'm passing through my form. So we need to store both of those. And a survey response, it needs to belong to a survey. So I will also need a survey ID. Okay, let's go ahead and migrate the database. PHP Artisan migrate, like so. And now, when we come back here, we've got surveys, it's empty, and we've got survey responses. Let's give this a go. Let's see if we did everything correct. I'll just click on a couple of random choices here. My name here, email at email.com. Let me complete the survey, and it says thank you, but let's see if it really worked. For my surveys, I've got a new survey here, and it's associated with my questionnaire ID. It's got the name, it's got the email, and then I've got all of my answers here for each of the questions. So notice how everything is filled out for us. And through the magic of all that work that we did with naming our input fields and radio fields correctly, everything just works. And look how clean my controller ends up being. Because I could just pass through this data, I can do proper validation, and I continue to only have a handful of lines inside of my controllers. There's a little bit more work that I want to do, but let's go ahead and leave that for part 4. So for part 4, we'll go ahead and try to wrap up the entire project and be done with final projects for Laravel 6 beginner lessons. Great job on this lesson. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell button. That way when new lessons get posted, you get notified immediately. So with that, my name is Victor, and I'll see you in part 4.